We're almost done. We talked about weighted student formula. Let's just keep going through that. You know, Seattle had a really model weighted student formula system. And the basic idea is if you are going to give this kind of autonomy to principals, you got to answer the question, how much money are we going to send to each principal? Well, you're not going to send every principal $5 million regardless of how many students they have. That doesn't make sense. You're going to send them $4,000 per student regardless of whether that student is special ed or not? No, that doesn't make sense either. Now, the will of the state in every case is that we're going to spend on each child whatever it takes to bring each child up to the state standards. And that means that children who are English learners, who are special ed, who are from low-income backgrounds are going to get more money. But that's not the way the money actually gets distributed. That's how it gets from the state to the district, and then every district redistributes it, largely because it has been forced to do so by a clause in the union contract with teachers, which gives to teachers the right, which was cured by the former school board in Seattle, I am told, gives teachers the right to laterally transfer based on their seniority into an opening in any school. And what happens over time is that not all of teachers, but many, many of the most experienced teachers gravitate towards the schools with the highest income families. And as a result, those schools have an average salary that may be twice that of schools in the poor areas. And they end up spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a year more per student in the wealthy schools than in the poor schools, which is the exact opposite of the will of the state. Now, when Seattle implemented weighted student formula during John Stanford's tenure, John Hay Elementary in Queen Anne Hill, Principal Joanne Testacross was controlling only $25,000 a year out of her budget. In came decentralization and weighted student formula, and the very next year, Joanne Testacross controlled $2 million of her budget. And she and her teachers said, we're going to use that plus our control over curriculum, schedule, and staffing to make some changes. And what they did was they hired 24 part-time credentialed retired teachers as math and reading coaches. They changed the schedule. Instead of having everybody do reading at 8 a.m. as all schools do across the nation, because the theory is that children have the best attention span then, they staggered it so they could send a flying squad of teachers to each classroom and break down the 25 students into groups of 6 or 7, each with a reading coach or a math coach. Not coach, but additional qualified teacher. And if you watch those teachers, they immediately broke their 6 or 7 students into a red and a blue group, depending on their reading level. And then they would set perhaps the red group to work independently, and they would take the other 3 blue students and work with each of them one-on-one, and then flip it. If you can't identify how the instruction is taking place one-on-one in part of every day, you should believe that instruction isn't happening. I'll pass this one by. You have Marguerite Rosa, a great scholar at the University of Washington, who's really an expert on weighted student formula and the way it addresses issues of equity, and I won't add to her. Let's go to the next one, please. I already said this. Let's go keep going. I already did that. You have to have good principles to make this work. There is no substitute. New York City has the best system for selecting, training, and coaching principals I have ever seen anywhere in my life. It's not cheap. It's a 15-month program. They pay their salary usually at the assistant principal level. I calculate it costs them about $180,000 to train a new principal. New York City used to be chronically short of principals. They used to drag in people off the street and call them a principal. But that was because principals had no authority, and nobody wanted to be a principal. They got blamed for everything, and they had no authority. Now it's changed completely. Now everybody wants to be a principal. So they have 65 openings per year in their Principal Leadership Academy. And last year they had 1,600 applicants. of whom they judged about 600 were fully qualified. And then they offer up to 3 years of coaching for new principals. They offer extensive help to principals who are opening new small schools. You know, I have been to the leadership training programs, the famous programs at General Electric, at IBM. I've been to all the leading graduate schools of business. None of them has a leadership program that is as good as a New York City leadership training program. But if you don't have something like that, you're not likely to succeed, at least not at a high level. Liv is getting really nervous, almost. So I'm going to go past this one too. Couple of last comments. Big districts need small schools because you are never going to have enough people to manage big schools well. Small schools are easier to manage. You got to have all of these freedoms in place. You can't pick and choose. This is not a menu. If you leave out school choice or if you leave out budget freedom, you don't get a 25% effect. You get a 0 effect. The hardest part of this is reorganizing and realigning the central office so that the central office staffers now get rewarded for helping schools rather than for protecting state funds, which is, you know, the way their jobs are currently set up. You can come in with a lot of style as a superintendent and have an effect for a short while. But style doesn't last. What lasts is restructuring the organization. School-based management, I think, is not a good idea. It essentially corrupts the accountability system by getting in the way. The superintendent needs to be able to hold principals accountable. If the principal can justifiably say the school-based, site-based management team decides what I can do, you're going to have a really hard time holding a principal accountable. You want to remove that excuse. You got to have principal training, and the biggest issue now is continuity of governance, as we said at the outset. So my thanks. This one says I want to acknowledge that my research was paid for by the Conrad Hilton Foundation, the Richard Riordan Foundation, and by my school, the UCLA Anderson School of Management. And I should say the first study was paid for by the National Science Foundation, as well as by Peter Bing in Los Angeles and the Broad Foundation. So these are all kind of unusual foundations for funding schools research because none of the schools research foundations would even give me the time of day. They thought that studying the organization of school districts would be a waste of time. So thank you.
Thank you. So wait. They want to ask you a question.